This is from Smaller Mouse. This whole book can be found inside of the New World Empire and the Interdimensional Coffeehouse. So if you're wondering which book to get of mine, get this one. It includes this and a couple others. Okay. Page 60. This is called Reib-Hasni. And it's a true story. Reib-Hasni. You remember Saddam Hussein? Anybody? Anybody old enough to remember Saddam Hussein? Something funny happened 7 years ago. Piyu was at work, I was at home, and I ordered myself some lunch from Swiggy. And then it said, your delivery partner is on the way. His name is Saddam Hussein. It's not something that comes up too often when you're in the United States. Generally, folks with the surname Hussein don't name their sons Saddam there. Or if they do, maybe there are, if you can look in your phone book and see. Do they still have those big, thick things? Been away for a while. Anyway, Hasni and Hussein are basically the same name. And, so Reib, which you might know is my surname, hyphen Hasni is the name of this. I'm going to read it now. Okay. African gold, religious artifacts, and ancient papyrus documents abound in the museums of Paris, London, New York, and Berlin for tourists to marvel at in detached curiosity, judgment, or sometimes wonder. By the way, I wrote this. This is my book, if you're wondering what the fuck's he reading. I spent the better part of my life studying these mysteries through the eyes of what has come to be termed the Western mystery tradition. Meanwhile, in Africa, their ancient forms of spirituality have been labeled evil by foreign invaders and forcibly replaced with Christianity and Islam. So one day, I left home, brought some of my books, my old Egyptian headdress, and my knowledge to the border of South Africa and Zimbabwe, where their Scientology headquarters used to be. There, you can find the world's first traditional African-based school of all the mysteries in the world, from Buddhism to Freemasonry. After I performed their neophyte initiation and a Hierophant installation for their founder, we, per their custom, chanted Hanya Shingyo, which they call the heart of the coup, and called upon all our ancestors to guide us while wearing black robes and baby powder on our faces. When I left, they gave me a gift, a very rare book on the mysteries of my ancestors, the Nords. Afterward, I came to Kathmandu without a plan. I knew I had to see where the Buddha was born, and I had 3 months to get it done. I woke the first morning and hesitantly went outside. The words, "What am I doing in Kathmandu?" were ringing in my ears until I heard the now quite familiar rendition of Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani. Playing from a store selling statues and incense, and everything else you'd find in only the coolest shops back home. I still call California home when I wrote this. I wrote this in 2017. Anyway. I'd lost my jacket in the transition, so I bought a new one and had breakfast. On my way back to the hotel, I got lost. I ended up at a wedding, where I met Ajay. He and I started talking about Tibetan Tantric Buddhism, and I came to discover that his ancestry is Indian, but his family lives in Nepal. He was a Hindu by birth and tradition, and Tibetan Buddhist by choice, and painted traditional thangka at a local school with a single yak hair and gold and lapis paint, if it wasn't obvious that the one that he's holding, that's the same one that's up above Piemander's head. Oh, hi Pieman. It's awkward. That was painted by Ajay, who I met in the story right here. Anyway, he showed me all the local sacred places. Then we took a cab to Bodhanath. We circled the stupa, and he taught me how to boldly cross the street with total trust that the cars would stop, per local custom. We went back to the 2 rooms in the brick village where the 11 members of his family slept on the floor, and I met his brothers, uncle, sisters-in-law, and nieces and nephews. I bought several thangka paintings, a year of kindergarten for 2 of the little ones, and several blankets, so they'd have a better winter. I taught the children some basic yoga poses, and the adults the Nyingma Tantric yoga meditation my dad had learned from Tibet via Hollywood Hills and Milan. They invited me to sleep on the floor with them, so I checked out of my hotel and moved in. I set up a speaker there and added some statues and sacred items to their house shrine, which was a wooden box in the corner of the bedroom, and they taught me how to make roti. Suddenly, sad news came. Their friend's young daughter had just died. No one knew exactly why, but she had been very sick. They had to begin 12 days of mourning, so they sent me on my way to Lumbini to see where the Buddha was born. After Lumbini, you have to go to Pokhara, Ajay's uncle Roshan said. What's in Pokhara? I inquired. You just have to go. Trust me, he said. I trusted him. I arrived in Lumbini and got lost. I asked a man with a motorcycle where the Mango Tree Hotel was, which Roshan had recommended. He knew the hotel because of the tree, but it had a new name now. Get on, he said, and I had my first of many rides on the backs of strangers' motorcycles in Nepal. I went, in the morning, to the temple which contains the 2,300-year-old ruins of the first Buddhist temple, built by King Ashoka, around the marker stone, which local tradition, 300 years after the Buddha had lived, said marked the very spot where he was born. I thought of Constantine in Jerusalem 300 years after Jesus, asking the locals which tomb was his, and taking their word for it. Without a time machine, it's the best intel we've got. First, I stood in line with the crowd, and I got a look at the stone. I connected with it, bowed sincerely, and went outside to meditate under the big Bodhi tree there. Pilgrims from the Philippines, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, and India all wanted to take selfies with the strange, lone white man among them, and eventually I made the long walk to the Japanese pagoda. Along the way, in the marketplace, I met Narayan, who hand paints Buddhist statues. That evening, I went back to the white temple built around the ancient temple, and this time it was empty. I was able to spend some proper time before the marker stone and asked Lord Buddha to help me along my path. I offered up, or down, what I had brought with me, a great deal of heartache. With a clean heart, my paternal grandfather answered my ancestor call from back in Africa, and I felt him guide me back to Narayan, where I bought all of the statues he had painted and met his brother, wife, and son, and they took me out to dinner. I had decided that yes, I would open a yoga studio when all was said and done. I still haven't gotten around to that. Maybe later in life. We'll see. And there I would sell thangka from my friends in Bodha and statues from my new friends in Lumbini. Afterward, I went back to the Japanese temple and chanted Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. There's two different, there's the more like traditional Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, and then there was like the guy that went off and started his own like rogue thing, and they chanted Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. So if you're familiar with this, you might be like, why is he pronouncing it funny? It's because you're part of the heretical one. Yeah, it's okay. Or at least your coworker brought you that one time to that guy's house and you sat in front of it. Anyway, then after another motorcycle ride, I found myself back at my hotel. It was late and time to turn in, perhaps, but a little voice told me to go across the street and order coffee. Shortly afterward, 3 fellow travelers arrived and stopped at my table. There were 3 empty chairs at my table, so I motioned toward the chairs, and they joined me. They were from the UK, Holland, and Germany, and it was my first time interacting with fellow travelers since leaving California. Late that night, after much beer and merriment, we retired to our hotels. The next day, I got on a bus to Pokhara. I was planning to stay in a hotel, but my assigned seat was beside a traveler from the UK who was staying at Nepalaya Eco Hostel, so I decided to stay there instead. I met travelers from Spain, Sardinia, Austria, Holland, UK, Sweden, Germany, Malaysia, France, and one from New Caledonia, who I later interviewed for one of my podcasts, To Be a Yogi. Between the late nights on the roof drinking Gorka and Everest and smoking hash with the traveler from Spain, and the early mornings on the roof taking their complimentary yoga classes, I found I had to stay a day longer than I'd planned. I also went across the lake twice and up the hill to the Japanese pagoda. I met a Malaysian traveler as he was praying in the middle of the night. I told him I was a fan of Sufi poetry. "You know about Sufi poetry?" he asked. I said, "The great religions are like sinking ships. The poets are like lifeboats." "That is good for business, isn't it, Hafiz?" And he took off his prayer cap and gave it to me. I met the son of the owner of a local Tibetan Buddhist shop, and we talked for hours over tea. In the end, he gave me the number of his friend Tashi, who is a monk at the International Buddhist Academy in Boda, so I could interview him for my podcast, What Would Yeshi Do, upon my return to Kathmandu. That interview is right here. You can check it out now or after we're finished, whatever you'd like. I came back to Kathmandu and decided to take my Ayurvedic doctor friend Yogesh's advice and stay at Hotel Horizon with his friend Devraj. There I met a traveler from Guangzhou, China. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. And we went to Bhaktapur Durbar Square and explored the local area around Tamil, including several restaurants and a spa. Then she left to reunite with her French boyfriend in Thailand, who had been watching our exploits on social media, prompting him to apologize for whatever it was he'd done, which had resulted in her traveling alone to Nepal. I decided to take a yoga class at the studio near my hotel one morning. There was a Dutch couple there, too. 10 minutes after the class was scheduled to start, I called the number on the sign to ask where the teacher was. The owner told me where to find the key, and I became the new teacher. I went on a trek to the villages where Devraj's parents and grandparents lived, Baseri and Kahari, and we concluded the 10 days by drinking the beer called Gorka in the city called Gorka, where the Gurkhas are from. Then, after spending a week with many Dutch people, and another week with several Indian baseball teams, Taro, a businessman from Osaka, checked into the room beside mine and introduced me to the Japanese side of Kathmandu. Having done business in Kathmandu for 20 years, he introduced me to his contacts here. See, I was in Kathmandu when I was writing this. And we dined in all the restaurants, saw shows in casinos, and I stayed up late every night, quite happily listening to his live gypsy jazz guitar performances, one of which you can find on Gwydion's Astral podcast right there. Then teaching yoga each following morning on less and less sleep. He gave me a lot of advice about my plans to build a yoga studio and offered to be my contact in Japan for anything Japanese I wanted to sell there and to organize retreats for Japanese people. Who knows, I might get back into yoga, but anyway. Eventually he left and I caught up on sleep. One night I decided to wander out into the night. I ended up in Durbar Square and found a small fire where sat Reib-Hasni, the Indian Sufi to whom Taro had introduced me. Over the hours which followed, the crowd around the fire included several locals, 2 Chinese women, and a yogini from Russia. I expressed my strong interest in Sufism, so Rahis began teaching me. I learned some basic moves and prayers, and we sang Hasbi Rabbi Jallallah. Hasbi Rabbi Jallallah, ma fi qalbi ghayrullah, Nur Muhammad sallallah, la ilaha illallah, Hasbi Rabbi Jallallah, ma fi. Rolling our heads around until we fell down. In the end, I kissed his hand, and he placed it on my head and named me Reib-Hasni. He gave me a sapphire ring and said, wear this ring every day, and within 40 days you will meet the woman of your dreams, the woman you are meant to be with, probably in India.
Why are you walking like some kind of Portuguese soldier? Marching on Goa beach.
Anyway, I just wanted to share that.